and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Pickard and thank you for joining us. We've reached our finale to season 4 and we have an awesome interview lined up for you. But before we get into that, a huge thank you to our guests so far this year. It's been a privilege hearing and sharing the stories from Sarah, Nick, Rob, Davey, Jen, James, Ashton and Kyle. And if you've not caught up on those episodes yet, please head over to our YouTube channel or any of our audio platforms. If you could give us a quick rate and review on whatever platform you're joining us on today, we would really appreciate it. And make sure you're subscribed to our monthly community update so you hear all the exciting podcast news, and we've got season 5 going live in the next few weeks, so make sure you sign up for that. So, on to today's show, and we are ending the season the same way we started, speaking to a hugely inspiring woman. I first came across our guest, Apolla Echino, through watching her amazing documentary, A Woman's Guide to the World, surfing the South Island of New Zealand, which I can assure you is the perfect 40-minute escape for your mind in these strange times. After doing a bit more research, I found out it was actually a series, and not only included the visual masterpiece that I'd found on Amazon Prime, but also an incredible short film about a voyage from Antarctica to the Amazon rainforest. The link to both these documentaries are in the show notes, so after today's episode, make sure you check those out. The discussion today is an inspiring and philosophical one that gives us some incredible insights into the challenges of being an aspiring female professional and explores some of the wider social issues that Apolla has encountered across her journey. So here we go, the finale to season 4 and episode 32 of the Rogue Monkey podcast, Finding Your Why, a conversation with director and surfer Apolla Echino. Hello, Apolla. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Well, thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing some time with us today. I've given our listeners a little bit of an insight into your story, but without spoiling all the surprises. So if you can just give us a quick introduction as to who you are, what you do, and kind of your journey so far.
Yes, and is there any swearing allowed on this podcast?
I think we can have that. That's fine.
Okay. I'm going to try to dial it back just because in general in my life, I'm trying to be a little bit more aware. And I remember presenting the Surfing the South Island of New Zealand film at a women's surf film festival and felt so passionate about all the stories. And then at the end, one of the guys that ran the operation, I said, okay, so how was that? He was like, really empowering, but I just wish you swore less. So I'm just going to try to find the middle ground.
Hey, that's fine.
There were little girls sitting in the front row. Oh, that reminds me of a great story to tell you later on about working with men in the surf world. Okay, so I am a filmmaker is the broad term. I really consider myself sort of a blue-collar director producer whose guiding light is her intuition. So every decision I've made has been very much based on my gut feeling about something. And if I feel like I really want something, then that's enough for me to go out and try to make it. So I don't own any property, but I have a body of work that I stand behind and feel very passionate about. And I love telling stories with women or people of color or underrepresented communities, or even the most represented community, the planet, as the main subject, and trying to give a voice to and a platform to all of those elements.
Well, we'll make sure we've got so many videos and links and everything to share with all the listeners and viewers at the end. But I'm curious, how did this all start? Because I'm sure when they said to you at school and your career's advice when you're 11 and 12 at school, what do you want to be when you're older? Would this have been the kind of thing you started with, or has this evolved?
Well, I grew up in Alberta, Canada, which is an oil-based province. So a lot of meat and potatoes. And I really don't remember knowing anything about people who work in the creative arts until, I was 18, until I worked at a clothing store and I got to really feel what having a tribe could look like. And they were full of, people of different ethnic backgrounds, different sexual orientations. And that really opened my eyes. My minimum wage job at the West Edmonton Mall that's where I just started to feel more myself. So I think that my entire career and also my personal life has been led by not dangling carrots, but this monster gnawing at my back, that can be depression or um, not having a voice or not speaking my truth or not expressing. And so this, if I lay off the gas for 1 minute, I start to feel that sense of turning in on myself. So, it's been a survival mechanism. And it's always feels like it's in the dark. There's no playbook that I've been going along with. When I need to know what my next move is, I just stop and try to become really still and silent, whether that's surfing or in my day-to-day life. I just take a break and rest and think, okay, what is the next right move? And sometimes that plan can be 2 years in advance or 3 years in advance, and I can start to think about how to plot my way. But I'm really trying to live not a unique life, but a life according to what I want and what I want to say. And sometimes, like, that'll be as simple as I'm going for a walk along the ocean, and I will just have this overwhelming feeling, and I'll speak to the ocean and say, just please let me be your voice. Like, how can I better serve the health of you? So I suppose my faith is Mother Nature and the planet, and that's where I keep going back to. And I truly feel um, that there's a communication there. And I mean, everything is alive around us, right? That would be what I consider my God. And I've been out in the ocean and, like, in a sense, praying or asking for some guidance. And I'll literally hear, which I think is feeling from deep inside me, the word like flow, just flow. And I'll be like, oh, that's such a smart thing to say. And so really, like, flow has been my mantra. And in a sense, how I'm unlearning the patterns of our society of how we need to work and how we need to earn money, and just the idea of earning money and doing things that make us unhappy or unhealthy. So unlearning that and trying to find more of the flow, which I think is a more feminine approach to living, um, and releasing this constant desire to have so much financial security. Because the more I look around, the more I realize that the wealthiest or wealthier people have gotten that way in the expense of people, or in the expense of the planet. And that's really not what I'm about. I'm really trying to learn to live within a flow of, Mother Nature.
I find that really curious, and I'm going to draw some lineations in the world of sport, because we've interviewed a number of very, very successful athletes in various sports on this show, yourself included. And I think something that's really curious is actually saying that this notion of flow, being in the moment, being completely doing whatever it is. And I've spoken to a number of, like, Olympic medalists that will tell you, some of the most incredible moments they've had have been when they almost feel like at one with their sport, where it just happens. And they almost spend their entire careers for maybe seconds, minutes of that experience. Whereas actually you're almost flipping that on its head and saying, how can I have that every day? How can I have a life that actually feels like I'm just being myself, being true to who I am? And I'm really curious as to how that's evolved, because especially in the modern day and age, you can so easily get sucked into this world of money, fame, social media, whatever it is, with almost completely bypassing what you're talking about. So did you almost have a point where you caught yourself and said, no, this is what I want to do? Or was it a gradual transition, or how did you get to that?
Like I said, I'm always just chasing the dragon of self-fulfillment. And if you think about it, like, you're tuning two different frequencies and you're just a little bit off, and then you turn that dial and those two wave frequencies match up. Like, that's what we're going for, right? And anybody who has any humanity wants to feel that way more of the time. Like, even in my marriage, for example, where I know that culturally you can be fine to feel distant from your partner over time, and that's great. but that's just not what I desire in my guts, right? So I want those frequencies to be aligned more often than not. So every day it's just about mining, like, well, how do I get closer to that? How do I, how do I get in contact with that flow? How do I step aside? And certainly going to sports every single day helps me at least connect with my own inner frequency, because sometimes I'm a little bit off or out of tune. And just raising, as we know, just raising your heartbeat, increasing your breath, being, surrounded by nature, all of those elements, which is why surfing is the perfect hobby and activity, in my opinion. They just bring you right back to your center. So for me, that's what surfing is, even though I never pursued it professionally and almost wouldn't want to, because then, I remember for the surfing film, the New Zealand one, we only could afford one battery for the drone. So it lasted 15 minutes. And as you know, surfing, like sometimes a set doesn't come for 15 minutes. So I'd be out in the water and just hearing the zzz, the buzz of the drone, and just waiting for the wave and being like, I know, I'm trying to catch a wave. And it was so stressful. And I thought, oh yeah, I could never compete with surfing. You have these 15 or 20-minute heats. That would just be way too stressful for me.
Now, we talk about surfing a little bit, and we're fortunate we've had a number of guests on both this season and the next season from the world of surfing. And something that fascinates me about it, and I can only speak from this country, it's one of the fastest growing sports in this country, and there's a huge amount of growth professionally all the way down to grassroots. Ironically, at a time where actually it represents almost the opposite to what's going on in society, where you're actually getting people come together in a non-competitive way, not to make money, for an immersive experience. And that's growing as quickly as, like you say, it almost feels like the rat race, where actually people are chasing whatever it is, money, wealth, fame. And I just find that quite a curious thing, where you get people actually going, no, that's not for me. And I'm going to go to a sport that almost embodies everything that's not that. And surfing, I think, is huge. Not benefited from it in the sense, it is what it is. But it's surfing, unless you've done it, it's really hard to explain pretty much what you've just done there, very eloquently, I might add, of how valuable it actually is to you as a person, not just as like an activity that you almost tick the box.
Yeah, I mean, I love that I'm on board with people marketing the surf lifestyle, because it's a lifestyle that has more fresh air in it. As long as they're not marketing sexy young bodies, I'm 100% on board. So you're marketing connection with the ocean. The equipment is, you don't have to have that much stuff to surf, so you're not always buying the freshest new thing. I was able to, for 10 years of surfing, I had only ever owned secondhand boards. So there's a great market for that. And I recently did purchase my first brand new board, and it was very exciting. But it's one of the most important things you can do in nature, as well as swimming, because when you're in the water, like the more that people that surf, the more people that engage with the planet and with the soil and step outside of the concrete and step outside of the heat and the air conditioning, the more people that engage with the planet on a daily basis, the better it's going to be for the planet. And, I heard this great analogy of is giving yourself a self-examination for breast cancer, for lumps. And a friend of mine and I were talking about it years ago, and I was like, I don't know what I'm looking for. And she said, well, if you do it every single day, you will notice when something is different. It's just like if you go out into your garden every single day, you start to notice when something is different. And certainly for us water people, we've been noticing over time how the water has changed. You listen to even the David Attenborough documentary. He says within his lifespan that this is a witness statement, that this is what he has seen changed firsthand. So I just think that the more people in the water, like it's a sport where you're going to be drinking some of the water. You're going to be submersed completely and half drowning for a second. You're going to be taking big gulps of it. And, when you're skiing, you're usually not just like eating a bunch of the snow. And same as when you're going on a hike, you're not licking the bark or ingesting some of the soil and being like, oh, this tastes a little bit like mercury. But when you're in the ocean, you can sure taste when or feel when something is off. Like, I mean, many of us have had very upset stomachs after surfing because of what's in the water. So I just think that it's putting us on the front lines of conservation to a certain extent, and which also is partially why, you know, I'm a plant-based diet from a very political and conservation standpoint, that fish is more valuable in the ocean's ecosystem than on my plate. So I just, you know, the more that I can embody that wholesome, you know, survival of the healthy planet, then the better it is. And surfing certainly informs that. And it's also just fun. Oh my God.
It really is. It's such a I mean, my other half says I can tell when you've been surfing, and I can also tell when you need to go surfing. You know, the people don't people appreciate the value of it, but they can also tell you enjoy it that much that when you don't. I mean, at the moment we've been in lockdown for what feels like ever, and actually it's like I just want to go to the beach. I just want to go to the beach. And hey, we, you know, worst things in the world and keeping things in perspective, but it puts you in such a better mood, which then has the ripple effects of your work, like your work, your relationship, your friendships, all of those sorts of things benefit from an activity that might only last an hour a day, but actually for 9 or 10 hours a day you benefit from it. And I think that again, it's, I wouldn't say we sell it as a sport, but that's one of the massive benefits and things that I find so attractive about it, is how much better place it puts me in.
Yeah, I agree. And even it was so interesting how everything always lines up to surfing for me, where after a while during the pandemic, they were saying if you have COVID, it's best to lie on your stomach because you can get a deeper breath into your lungs. And I mean, what are we doing all the time paddling around on surfboards? We're on our stomach. We're just increasing our lung capacity so much. And a lot of us struggle with meditating and sitting still. And, you know, it's partially to do with our age. And, you know, we have that abundance of energy, and surfing just brings us to that stillness. And I don't know if you've ever thrown on like a white noise, but when you're surfing, I mean, it's a white noise machine going on. And it's one of the only places now that flying airplanes all have Wi-Fi, it's the only place where we can really everybody be disconnected from their devices.
And also I think as well, it's, and I don't want to get too philosophical on it, but I sit out there sometimes and think, outside of the realms of wetsuit and surfboard technology, I could have been sitting here 500 years ago and everything would look pretty much the same. And it's probably one of the few immersive experiences where actually it's almost timeless. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, because you, especially when you go on a journey with surf friends. So I've surfed with people that have now got children that are looking at taking up bodyboarding and surfing, and I think that's pretty cool. And then hey, when I was out in Gold Coast 4 years ago, I remember a guy telling me, I think he was in his 70s, and he said, oh, every weekend I take a 3-hour drive up from inland, which to him was a nip across the road. And he said, I come out here, I surf, I come surfing with my son, I come surfing with my grandkids, and it's become part of who I am. And you're like, something that is timeless and yet connects the generations together. I really like, again, that aspect of it. Now, I'm curious. I want to jump back a little bit to the environmental stuff and the planet stuff you've talked about so far. A lot of people, and quite rightly so, don't have opportunities to potentially travel and see all the things you've seen. But when you've actually seen some of the places that you've been firsthand, and I want to jump on the Antarctica stuff, because we watch the Attenborough programs and all these other things, and it brings it to life so much more when you actually see it. Whereas I'm actually having a conversation with someone now who say, I've stood on a boat and actually watched an iceberg fall into pieces. You know, what was that whole experience like? And reflecting back on it now, has it changed or like brought to life any more of your passion around the planet?
Oh, what a great adventure. It's hard to get to, which always makes it more rewarding. It wasn't motorized, which is one of, yeah, I suppose one of the main tenets of the adventures I go on. It's partially trying to be off of the always self-propelled, or, you know, with that one, I was on that 100-year-old sailboat. So we were sailing. Some of the things that really struck me were the air that's contained within the iceberg that is released is, tens of thousands of years old. So that was just so incredible to try and grasp, that the air that I was breathing in that instant by being down there was that ancient to me. So I loved that experience. Having been influenced by Shackletons, by all of those great adventurers. Even Reinhold Messner had gone to Antarctica and done that dog sledding trip across, even though he was a mountain man. Those were my great influences. And that trip came about, but I had no idea. I had no idea I ever wanted to visit Antarctica, but I was reading an interview with a novelist who had to go to Antarctica to research one of his books, and he found out about this old ship, and it just sounded horrendous and archaic, and he just talked about the grit, and that there's 6 guys in one room and one toilet, and just really grim odds, and just like the sounds you would hear of people being sick, and the sounds of the boat, and it just I was so overwhelmed with the singular thought, I have to go and do that. And I'm not sure exactly, but I researched which ship he must have been on, and it was very apparent because there's only a few tourist tall ships left in the world, I think. And so I was able to get myself down to the southern tip of Argentina and get on board this sailboat, and it was, I think, 21 or 23 days. And it was partially a training sailboat, so you had to be on watch shifts. And I remember on day 4 of being very cranky and tired, I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't enjoy any aspect of this because I'm so tired all the time. But as you know, that can be a major part of it.
So, and again, I don't want to dwell too much on one particular trip, but the polarization in our world, quite literally, between saving the North and the South poles in terms of being mindful of everything melting, but then also stuff like deforestation and all of those sorts of things in kind of Central America, and going in such a short space of time from almost one extreme to the other. Like, how did that come about? But 2, what was it like, seeing an iceberg, and then within, a few weeks, it's as far removed the opposite part of the world as possible? What was that like?
Yeah, it just made sense to me that I landed back in Argentina, and I was like, well, I'm on the correct continent now. Like, of course I would go to the Amazon. As a kid, I remember reading about the pink dolphins in the Amazon, and I was like, oh yeah, I got to go. It was just like, of course I'll go. And also, I just want to say something that is very pertinent to your question, is that all of those things are very much connected to travel, to flights. So it is a very conflicting experience having this wanderlust. And, I travel constantly for filming, and I know just paying for my carbon footprint through the Delta app or something is not really the answer. And I'm trying to be more aware in terms of like settling down for a month at a time, and not, I have reduced my travel significantly, and I'm just trying to be a little bit more traveling closer to home. And that's an issue. Like, what about when all this gets lifted? Like, will we all resume the amount of travel that we have undertaken? Airplanes are a major, like, when I calculate my carbon footprint, it's so low, so low, so low, so low. And then it says, how many flights do you take? And then I say, how many a year? And then it just goes into the red. And I do what I can. And I think that eliminating animals from our diet is the single most important thing we can do. And then being very aware of how many flights I get on, certainly.
So in terms of, and I know we talked before we started recording around like activism in its broadest sense and those sorts of things. So we've talked about some of the stuff to do with plant-based stuff. We talked about some of the things to do with the oceans and the forests and the jungles and stuff that you've experienced. At what point did you move into, or did you have to start dealing with this imbalance between male and female approach in not just your industry, but in wider society? Because that's something that just from watching, 35 minutes on that Amazon Prime documentary, and you're looking at it thinking, I've seen that. I've seen that in the water myself in just my sport. And then you obviously start rolling that out in society, and it's huge. But how did that all kind of come about? What was your early experiences of it?
Being born and being born to a misogynistic, sexist Italian father. I always say that I was so fortunate that he only had daughters, because if there was a boy in our family, then we probably would have been relegated to the kitchen or something. Like I would have seen the comparison so acutely. Whereas with just daughters, he ended up treating us like sons. So it was never like, oh, when are you going to get married, or what kind of husband are you going to have? It was like, well, what kind of work are you going to do? And doing unconventional things. Like my parents were divorced, and so at one point, instead of just paying or giving my mom the money to help support us, he had my sister and I come up with a budget, including paying some rent, and that really helped me budget from a very early age. So there was just always the work ethic and discipline around that versus, much less emphasis on finding a partner and settling down into a marriage. Just the idea of not working was never entered our mind. But then those are the positive aspects. The negative aspects are that, we learn to see other women through the eyes of the men that raise us. And there's been a lot of unlearning of that just like, I guess my main goal in life is that somewhere nearish the middle or the end of my life, I would love for the idea of gender to not even be a discussion anymore. Like, oh yeah, it's a given. It's equal pay, equal everything. Yeah, we understand that physically there are differences and we have to be more sensitive around this and that, but that I would love to see that at the end of my life. And I think that will tie into the conservation work as well. I think that if we bring in more of not just like being a woman, but like the feminine aspect of the men, the part that is very sensitive and caring, I think just like encouraging those things again. I think by women being the more fuller expression of themselves, men will allow that as well. Like, I remember having a very important interview, a Zoom call very recently, and my husband and I had been arguing, and I was in a really bad mood, and I thought, gosh, I better get myself together for this call. And then I was like, a guy wouldn't even consider that. Who cares? Like, I show up however I'm feeling. I'm good at my job. I'm just going to have this interview, and it'll be fine. I don't have to be sweet or in the best mood. And so I think that taking away the unsustainability of always having to be kind and sweet and letting us have the full breadth of our emotions will also let men realize, like, oh, I don't always have to express through anger. I can also express through sadness or fear. And I see that a lot in the water, that the acceptable emotion for men to go to is anger or frustration. And the acceptable emotion for a woman to go to if she's angry or frustrated is more passive. I'm going to sit on the shoulder, or maybe I'll just paddle and sit over there a little bit. So like the intersection of those two is very interesting as well. And the confidence to even be able to say to a dude like, hey, you know what, it's not your turn now, or you've snaked me a couple of times now, so you know what, I'm not going to back paddle you, but I'm going to drop in on you probably now because you've snaked me a few times. Like, just getting to a level where you can now have that ability. And after 10, 11 years of surfing, I now feel confident. When I watch the New Zealand film, that's a different surfer now. I don't cry in the water because I've been intimidated. I'm way more confident. You can tell when someone is paddling and they're going to catch the wave. And I don't feel as timid anymore. And certainly felt like I sat on the shoulder too often throughout my surf trajectory. So Now I try to sit more in position. It doesn't have to be every day. I don't feel that aggression every day, but every several surf sessions, I'm like, okay, just go and sit on the inside or go and sit at the point a couple of times, and then you can sit outside. And then actually this woman here in Mexico gave me this great piece of advice the other day, or something that she does. She's like, and she's phenomenal, this shortboarder. And she said, sometimes when everybody's hungry for waves and everyone's sitting outside and like wanting to catch the big ones, I'll just go on the inside, or I'll see where it's breaking nicely and no one's really sitting there and catching it because it's not the monsters. And I'll just go and catch 4 or 5 waves. I'll feel a little bit of a workout. I'll feel a little bit satiated. And then I'll be like, okay, now I'll go and sit outside. And then she won't feel as like aggressive or impatient. And I found myself doing that more and more. And in fact, sometimes I've had such a good time that I end up staying on the inside now, even with a longboard.
That's really, really cool. I'm just thinking like what you said there about I guess a level of like emotional development, both from the guy's perspective of being more in touch with their emotions, full stop, but then also, like you said, seeing it from the other end. And something that jumped out for me from my experiences of surfing, I used to get super frustrated, whatever it was, wasn't working out, it was on the shore, whatever it was. And I went on a trip about 3-ish years ago to Portugal, maybe a bit longer. And I was staying at this surf hostel, and one of the things they had up on the wall was a bad day in the ocean is still better than a good day in the office. And obviously it depends on what your job is, because some people that's their job anyway, so it's fine. But I was kind of like, I've certainly moved on over the last 3 or 4 years, certainly in the last 12 months, being a lot more emotionally aware, but also grateful for what you've got. Because like I've had an awful surf, and it's like, whoa, you've just had 3 hours in a beautiful beach with probably some of your friends, with nature, you've seen some dolphins that have been out and about, whatever it is, and you haven't had the wave that you wanted. But actually, life's not too bad. And I think that's something, speaking from a guy's perspective, that's something I've had to learn and got better at. And therefore, you become more empathetic to others in that situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like how you've been taught things throughout your childhood affects how you learn things as an adult. And it's also just amazing that any adult tries to learn something new, whether it's a language or a sport. Like I admire that so much. It takes just, you think about learning something as a kid or a teenager, and it's so much easier. And starting something and sucking at it and then getting slowly better is, I just think is so cool. Like I started at 30, my husband started at 40. Like I just have so much admiration for that. And it's a sustainable sport, right? Like you can do it until you die. You can do it while you're pregnant. You can do it um, at almost all times in your life, unless you're grounded and inland somewhere.
And even then, what we were talking about before the recording with Nick, who we had in episode 26, it won't be that many more years before actually year round, day or night, guaranteed to turn up and get surf wherever you are in the world. And for me, the society is going to be a much better place when that starts happening.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can't wait. And apparently it's a great workout as well. Even a wave pool, like surfing for that hour straight is a pretty good workout also.
It really does. I mean, we've got a guy called Tom, who's kind of a surf writer and, former international junior surfer on the next season. And he was, we were talking off air about a number of things, and he was saying like, yeah, okay, it's not the sea, but I tell you what, an hour of doing it, it's hard work. And you're kind of like, that's awesome to hear that from somebody who gets it. Because obviously a complete novice is going to go, oh, it was really hard anyway, but has never experienced 4 foot onshore, getting battered in the wind and the rain. Whereas actually when you go to a wave pool and you're like, this is still hard work, you're like, that's pretty cool. I'll probably make the extra hour and a half journey to really try and get there. So no, it's pretty cool. Right, next thing I want to jump on is, we've talked all about these experiences and your development journey to get where you are. That philosophy of who you've become and what you're trying to be, that obviously shapes a lot of the projects looking forwards that I'd imagine you're looking to get involved in. So are there any things, even if you haven't said what they are or when you're planning on doing them, are there things where you are now in your life that you look forward and say, I'd really like to try this, or I'm really going to try and achieve that, or there's a project I'm really passionate about, whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about telling stories about female surfers around the world. And I've just committed so much of my life to trying to get projects like that funded. And, it's still in a weird way ahead of its time. Like the surf companies, they love it. I'm pretty adamant that my surf films have no bikinis in them. Um, and certainly no rear end shots of men or women. Like I won't objectify either of them. Um, and I usually like to show more middle-aged people doing it, and not pros. And it's very, very challenging to get projects like that greenlit. So a lot of it has been very self-funded or a small amount of sponsorship. And I'm really trying to take that to a larger stage, where, because people are hungry for it. There's um, a lot of eyeballs on the New Zealand surf film that I did. And there's not even a ton of wave riding in that. Like it's 40 minutes and, not a lot of waves. And the surfer is intermediate at best, and wearing a 5 millimeter wetsuit. So yet it resonates with both men and women, and also, teenage boys and girls. So I would love to create more of that content. And if it means that I need to take more commercial projects so that I can then take a month out and take a major pay cut to do a project like this, that would be great. But ideally, the surf companies catch up and say, oh, you know what, this is our actual audience. We're not selling um, that much surf apparel to 18-year-old teenage girls, so we don't need to do that, create that social media comparison anxiety. Um, so yeah, that's certainly, I want to be part of turning that dial. I want to be part of that movement, and I think I am, but it just still feels very outskirts-esque.
That's really, really cool to hear that. And I think we're in an age, and again, I think we spoke about this last week when we were doing some prep work, this concept of actually we're in a generation now where a young person can pick up their phone, within reason, run an entire channel, have people from all over the world following their messages, generate potentially an income from it as well. Those, like you say, I think almost the world is going to catch up quite quickly to we. At the moment, we've got trailblazers like yourself and Sarah, who we had at the start of the season, but actually eventually you're going to have enough people catching up with you and going, yeah, we'll help with that. Yeah, we'll help with that, because it's becoming more and more normal, if you like, the traditional approach to not just business, but a lot of the social discussions we've had already. It is getting there. It almost feels like it's just painfully slow. And we're kind of like, come on, hurry up, because it is so powerful.
Yeah, we're seeing a movement towards people wanting to see a reflection of themselves. I think in the past, we've been given fantasies of like, oh, this is the ideal version of something. And we're actually realizing that we want more of reality. We want more to relate. We want to see people of color want to read books about people of color. They want to see leaders that look like them. I want to see surfers that look like me, that have a little bit of a tummy or a strong shoulders in wetsuits. Like, I don't want to see the tiny little person holding a surfboard. Like, that doesn't inspire me. Um, I need food to sustain my 3-hour surf session. And so the idea of like me feeling ashamed when I'm looking at what someone could potentially look like as a surfer versus like truly in the water, like I feel so powerful and I feel so strong. Um and I don't look down at my stomach once. I mean, it would be a problem if my stomach were stopping me from popping up, or if that I was out of breath and getting scared a lot. I would maybe first go down a level in waves, but um, there's nothing on my body that's a real problem when I'm surfing. It's only when I'm scrolling or looking to buy a new bathing suit that I start to feel like something's wrong with me, which, is just, it's really incredible. Like the older you get, I'm starting to sound a little bit more like the old lady. Like all advertising is set up to make you realize or feel that you're not enough or you're not good enough. So once you start to see the matrix that is set up for that, they are trying to constantly keep you out of feeling centered and feeling like you're enough. They don't want you to just go and spend hours and days in nature, because when you're in nature, you're so fulfilled and you feel like um, you're not shopping online. You're just being in yourself. And, you know, what we actually need right now to be happy is so much less than we ever thought. You know, even on these trips, like we brought like how many sets of clothes, and I'm completely happy having one warm sweater, one pair of jeans, and one t-shirt. And, you know, as long as I'm warm in the water, then I'm happy and content.
I always used to get a frown when I was packing up for a surf trip, and there would be maybe 3 wetsuits and 3 surfboards and 1 hoodie. They'd be like, "You're going for a week," and it's like, "Yeah, but I'm going to spend 99% of the day in the suit, and when I get out and have a shower, the same hoodie's going on because it's less stuff to throw in the car." And it's it's not a negative. It's a lifestyle thing, and it's also not stressing about that sort of stuff because. You know, I know people in kind of the spheres that I've worked in and friendship circles from years gone by where people won't leave the house without feeling like everything's perfect or they're wearing the right clothes in case the fashion police are outside the front door. Whereas I've had days when I've been staying by the coast or at families or on holiday or whatever it is, and you wake up and it's 2-3 foot offshore, and you're throwing on you're not bothered about any of that, and it's like, right, now apply that mentality within reason to life and not stress about stuff that just doesn't matter.
Well, we have outsourced our value system into very bad hands. So I agree. Like the values are not in how many hoodies we have, and in fact, we're learning now how horrendous the apparel industry is for our planet. So, you know, even with Patagonia, with all that they're doing on upcycling their stuff and fixing all of your old garments, like the wetsuit I've had for 6 years, every summer I send it in and they repair it. So if I have holes or any water seeping in, um, and they keep reminding us like there's no such thing as sustainable consumerism. Like just try and buy less. And I feel like the pandemic has really shown us that, because for a lot of us, it's taken away the amount of work we're doing, and some of the money that goes along with that. But I think the more time we spend in nature, or certainly on surf trips, you're like, oh, I'm happy with this amount of stuff. And so if we can just pause, you can put as much stuff in your cart as you want online. And then if we just pause or take a day or two and remember, oh, I have that hoodie already, and then maybe we don't have to buy it in that instant.
And then spend the money on things that are actually experiences or investing in the right things. There's a beer company over here that's kind of exploded quite quickly, and they do stuff where like they'll say for every pint you buy, we'll plant a tree. So they'll have like carbon negative beer, so that for every pint, so you almost feel like this is great. I'm having a drink and I'm doing good for the planet at the same time. But it sounds a bit cliche, and people see companies like that as outliers. But it's like, sorry, have you never watched the David Attenborough thing? Have you not understood that the collective approach, if it doesn't become that quite quickly, our kids, our children's children are going to suffer for it? And considering we're such a hyper-connective society and world, more so than ever before, and we've got all the information, it's not like this is hidden away in some locked vault. People couldn't say, oh no, I had no idea. It's like, well, you did, you just chose to oversee it.
Well, I think it's selective amnesia. We see it a lot in our friends who still eat meat, or and I did it too. I smoked cigarettes and I knew all the studies and I knew how terrible it was for me, but I enjoyed it too much. I was selfish. And then eventually I was like, okay, enough. So it is, discipline has been a little bit lost, in lieu of having a lot of self pleasure. And I just think that there's maybe a little bit of balance that we're all craving to come back to.
100%. So I've got 2 more things I want to ask you. The first one is slightly hypothetical because there isn't a time machine. But if there was a time machine and you could go back and meet a teenage version of yourself, as we said earlier, like perhaps you didn't envisage all the things that you've gone on and done, but you've had so many incredible experiences up to this point. And what would you actually say to yourself, whether it was a tip, piece of advice, what would you say?
I think you might be a bit shocked at my answer. Invest. And this has to do a lot with how I've been educating myself lately on finances, and as a woman to start thinking this way. And this plays directly into why girls must play sports. The idea of goal setting, the idea of overcoming failure, the idea of value, the idea of experiential stuff. So these are things that girls are not taught. And there's been a huge movement towards female investment firms, making things more accessible to women. And, normally in a household with a male and a female, the man is the one controlling the money. And as we know, there are more women in the world that are not free than are free. And so it's a privilege to control our finances. And so to have invested, and I think about like what I spent my money on. I started earning money from a very early age working, and I bought too many clothes, and I went into debt sometimes like I bought nice clothes sometimes. And I sometimes think that was a major error, and that a disservice. Like, why was I spending money on how I looked versus my future and giving myself a sense of security? I think there's a really deep mechanism at play in that. And it was so interesting. I only thought about this recently since we talked about doing this podcast, that because on the surface it sounds so frivolous, like, I just bought a bunch of clothes. I could have been saving or investing maybe $300 a month starting as a teenager, when I first started buying disposable fashion. But I really think that teenage boys don't have that problem. Why are the girls, why is our energy and money flowing in that direction specifically? So, and I think that the more we get dirty, the more we kick something around, the more we punch something, the more we ride something and feel great about our bodies, and the more we take the focus off of our actual self and our appearance, the better we will be. And so investing is a big part of that. And it is interesting. I've been thinking a lot about like what it means to let a girl kick something, or paddle hard for something, and how important that is for us to realize that they need that outlet for their emotions as well. And they need to be able to punch something out. Like we have the same feelings as guys do. We need to funnel those in certain ways. So yeah, that's it. Invest.
I really like that. And I think coming from a sports world and having seen the value of, lots of young women that I've coached over the years go on and, have done very well in life, whatever career routes they've chosen, but actually sport has played a huge part in shaping who they are. And I kind of have to say this a lot when I do kind of talks with big groups of parents, and say, we do understand that the most important thing you're going to get out of your child's sporting journey cannot be measured on a scoreboard. It can't be put up on a trophy cabinet. And I think, again, that runs in complete as like a paradox with the world we're in now, where show me what you've achieved, show me your trophies, show me your titles. And actually it's kind of like, well, the traits and the tools, if you like, that we're trying to give to young people through sport is so much more than that. But we don't sell that because that doesn't look good on Instagram.
Yeah. Kevin, imagine if the roles were reversed here and I was asking you, like, why do you think we should let boys play sports? Imagine that world.
Yeah. And
imagine half of the population were being suppressed, and it were boys and men.
And I'd take it on even a step further to the point you made earlier. We are in, 2021. We're not in the 1900s here. We should be that shouldn't be a leading discussion point, and whether it's for a job interview, whether it's for a sports team, whether it's for a social media campaign or funding a film, doesn't make any difference for me. And I think we mentioned it last week around a really famous music school from around the world that did all of their interviews behind a screen, so that the people that were adjudicating could hear the music but not see the person, and even if it was unconsciously making decisions. allowing that person the freedom to be who they are and be judged 100% on that, and not an appearance or a, you know, whether they're male, female, black, white, whatever it was. It was very much no, 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 no. Show us who you are, and we're going to judge you for your entrance to our school based on that and that alone. And I thought, right, let's apply that philosophy across the board. And you imagine the world will be turned on its head.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea of meritocracy. But we're a little bit sick to go straight to meritocracy. We do need to give, in my opinion, some legs up, or we have to like have a bit more patience, because maybe some of the, say, a female musician coming out of Syria might not be as gifted as a white woman coming out of London. Like, so it's an interesting conversation that I think is very valuable to have. Like, well, we have to, yes, meritocracy, yes, like we shouldn't be able to see someone's, you know, foreign name on when we're looking at hiring somebody, but right now we kind of do have to do a little bit extra work to reach out and make sure that we are including those people. And as a white woman, I've never been denied anything because of the color of my skin. Certainly I've been marginalized. Certainly I've had to deal with sexism and misogyny, and to overcome those obstacles. But I don't know what it's like to have, in addition to all of that, my skin color be an issue.
So, I mean, we talked, and I kind of asked a question about you giving the message to yourself. And my last question, I'll readily admit, I stole off a fantastic interview I listened to a couple of weeks ago, but it asked a question to a couple of Olympic champions that have been on a journey of finding themselves after stepping out of the public light and actually being true to who they were instead of just chasing arbitrary targets. And the question was, having been all around the world, you see tons of advertising, tons of marketing, tons of opportunities to share a message. So if there was a billboard in every city on earth that could share a single message, looking at everything you've taken internally and your experiences, what would be your message to put on those boards going outwards to everybody?
Well, first of all, what was your favorite one that you've heard?
Oh, there's so many. They were talking quite heavily around mental health. So I think the line was, "You are enough." Well, you are enough. And I was kind of like, yeah, I can fully appreciate that. But I thought, because I talked to so many different people who've had so many different journeys and experiences, it's really interesting. And you kind of made the comparison there of, actually, I've been in a male female situation, but I've never been discriminated against because of my skin color. So I'd be really curious, from your position, what would be the message you would share with everybody?
Yeah, buy less, value yourself more.
That's it. It's too simple. I feel like a tagline. You should start a brand and just have that, and it would become a bestseller and fund all your projects.
But you realize that means selling something.
This is true, but if it's sold in an ethically correct way and for something that's doing good, then actually that's okay. We're okay with that.
Yeah. I do want to quickly tell you the story of the what I find quite funny after all these years was, I was working with a production company in New Zealand who helped me put together that New Zealand surf film, and they were just a phenomenal help and support system. But when I showed them the cut of my film, their big note was, you know, we think you should include more or talk more about your boyfriend or your ex-boyfriend. And I just was like, in what world would a male surfer making a surf documentary of him traveling some remote area in the winter surfing by himself, would someone ever say to him, "Hey dude, talk more about your girlfriend in the film"?
It's beyond bizarre, and it's been fascinating, because coming at it from a different part of the world with a shared experience of appreciation of both the environment and the sport of surfing, how similar some of these things are. And it's opened my eyes on some subjects, as our discussion with Sarah did at the start of the season, because I'm not a woman and I have a sister, you know, I have a mother, I have a partner, and it is what it is. I hear it, but actually some of the lived experiences that you've shared, I think, hopefully start a discussion, start a dialogue for people out there to actually think a little bit more before perhaps they either label something or make an assumption on some of the challenges. Because again, like I said a minute ago, we are in 2021, and we're not in a place where, we've got tyrannical leaders running the whole world and no one has any option to do anything. With a phone and a bit of willpower and some good connections, you really can create movements and move things on. So it's been a fascinating discussion, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, listeners.
Cool. A huge thank you there to Apolla for that philosophical and hugely insightful conversation. We've included the links to Apolla's YouTube channel and her website, where you can find out more about some of the amazing productions she's created. This notion of being comfortable in who you are and staying true to your values and beliefs was something that shone through across the entire interview. You can follow Apolla across the various socials, and we've included the links to these in the show notes. A lot of the messages there resonated with the themes emerging from episode 25, so if you enjoyed the discussion today, please make sure you head back and check out the recording we did with Sarah back at the start of the season. A thank you to all our guests so far for sharing their amazing stories, and we've still got so much more to come in 2021. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a quick rate and review. We would really appreciate it. And again, make sure you subscribe to our community updates so you hear all the exciting news as Season 5 goes live. Finally, a big thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for taking the time to engage with the show. It's awesome to see how much our community has grown in the last 14 months, with over 7,000 downloads of the show to date across 50 countries around the world. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for being part of the community that is the Rogue Monkey Podcast.